Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carolina Parra, and today I am going to ask some questions to Angelica Ramirez. She is
Mhm.
an English teacher of the American School Way. So, good afternoon, Angelica. How are you?
Good afternoon, Carolina. I am really fine. Thank you very much. And you?
Thank you. I am very good. So, Angelica, today I am going to ask you some questions for my English class. The first question is,
Mhm.
what do you think is the relationship between language and culture?
Okay. Firstly, I would like to say that between culture and language is there is an important relationship because a base of a culture is the language, and for the language, the most important is the culture. For example, when you say, let's talk in English, maybe you can imagine, or to your brain comes, or England or America. So, because this language is related to these two cultures. So, for that reason, they are very linked. If there is no culture, there is no language. If there is no language, there is no culture. For that reason, relationship is very, very important.
Okay, I agree with you. The second question is, what's the influence of culture in the process of a foreign language process?
Okay, as I said before, the influence of a culture is very important in a foreign language. I mean, for example, let me illustrate you with an example. Let me think. Well, do you know that nowadays we have multiculturalism every place in the world? For example, here in Bogota, we don't have too many influence of English culture. But, for example, if you go to London, you can find a big influence of different cultures there. You can say England is a pure England, I mean, in culture. You can see people from around the world, and these people from around the world, like, for example, Indian people, like German people, like many different kind of cultures, they have an incidence in this culture, in the language, of course, too. For example, maybe English people from the British people, sorry, they could talk or say some words from different cultures, like Turkish, like Indian, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's very important, the influence of a culture in a process of a foreign language, of course. And nowadays the language is not the same. I mean, everyday language is changing because of influence of a culture. For example, in Spanish, we don't say too much Spanish words like web. Web is an international word, and this web word has a big influence in all the cultures, right? So for that reason, yes, it's there is an influence, and that's important, that influence in the culture.
Yes, okay. Which cultural expressions do you know countries have through language?
Okay, which expressions? For example, in English, we have many different expressions to talk about different situations. Uh, Let me give you an example. I am blue. So if you go to the context, to literal translation, of course, it doesn't have sense. For example, in Spanish, in German, in other languages, but it means that you are sad. So that kind of idioms or expressions are very, very important in a culture. For example, when you say out of work, it means that you are unemployed, right? So there are different kind of expressions that, of course, they are a process of a language evolution. Yes.
Okay. Angelica, you were talking about the changes of the language. So why do you think is it important to have an oral tradition in a country?
Okay, an oral tradition. Do you mean with oral tradition like story, like I mean, like books, literature? Yes, or what do you mean with that oral tradition?
Okay. In this question, I think that the oral tradition is talk about, for example, the history of a place.
Mhm,
Like you were telling to me, the language changed a lot. For
mhm,
example, personally, I think that in the colonization time,
mhm,
the language was very different that it is nowadays. So I
mhm.
think that this is the oral tradition to take into account all our past and our present time.
Okay, so let me think. It is important to have an oral tradition in a yeah, as I agree with you, as you say, it's very important to take into account the past expressions because, for example, let me illustrate this. If we were talking about expressions, this is an oral tradition because it is a process of evolution, language evolution. So if we talk about an oral tradition, of course, we have to take into account this story. Also, in cultural story, there are, for example, or there are many authors, but let me illustrate this with a simple example. Shakespeare. Shakespeare, with his um, books, with his cultural way to speaking, he changed the way of how British people, or yeah, people who talks in, or speak English, um, talk. So yeah, for me, oral tradition is very, very important to have that kind of um, history. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think the oral tradition is very important for a language.
Okay, why? Why is it important?
Well, as I said, oral tradition um, let culture. I mean, a culture. How can I explain this? It's very important because this oral tradition can make to people from that country continue giving an evolution to a language, right? And not only in the past, but also in the future and in the present. And nowadays, we can use past expressions, for example, but also we can use nowadays expressions. Yes. So a culture always, for me, in a personal opinion, oral tradition always exists, no matter if it is a past or a present oral tradition, but it is still there, and that makes, sorry, that yeah, that a language could evolve to have an evolution, a really good evolution. For example, English from colonization, as you said, is not the same like nowadays. But if you see, without that colonization, we do, probably we wouldn't have, sorry, the language that we have today, because language is an evolution of oral traditions.
Okay. The next question is, what do you think? Do we teach language using culture or do we teach using language?
Uh, well, let me think. I think, okay, we teach language using culture, or Using language, culture using language. Oh, that's a really complicated question because I consider that it could be both. Yes, teaching language using culture is very important. For example, with my students, I always teach language using culture expressions, cultural. For example, I really love to teach them showing a picture, a painting of a famous painter in England. And with that painting, I really love that my students give some expressions or some sentences like what are they doing there in that picture or that painting, and they start to produce the language. They are painting the war, they are in a war, they are fighting. So in that context, I am teaching through the language, but also I teach culture using the language. I mean, when I say, for example, in British culture, we don't say, for example, let me check an example of us example. Okay, with the number 30. 30 is American pronunciation, but if you go to British pronunciation, you can say 30. So through the language, I am showing the culture. I am showing the pronunciation, differences of culture pronunciations. So yeah, I
Okay.
think it's both.
Yes, and I think that it is important to mention here that when we are teaching a language, we cannot teach a language if the students don't know about their own culture. For example, here I think that we can start from the basic things, from the basic knowledges
Mhm.
about their own culture, and we can continue learning about another cultures, taking into account our own culture and obviously
Mhm.
teaching a language, I think.
That's true. No, I absolutely agree. I agree with you. Mhm.
Okay. The last question for you today is, do you take into account culture in the strategies you use in your English classes? I mean, you were mentioned an example about the strategies that you use with your students about culture and about language. Can you give me another example for about these strategies that you use in the English classes?
Yes, for sure. Uh, I I use paintings, but not also paintings. I use, for example, videos. Mr. Bean is a very cultural actor, and I think with Mr. Bean, for example, I show this video to my students, and we watch the scene, and then I say, okay, what kind of cultural things you can notice there? Also, I asked to them, could you please describe me what you see there? What kind of food did you see? What kind of taxis or cabs did you see? Do you know that taxi is not the proper name for that car in United Kingdom? In United Kingdom has another name. So I started to make some differences, right? And also I mentioned, as you said before, the own culture that we have here, how we can call the taxis the same, but in United Kingdom is different. For example, another one, the let's check cookies in United Kingdom. The cookies are not cookies; they are biscuits. So that's culture differences that students or they are very important that students know these cultural differences not only in, for example, story, books, paintings, but also the differences between words that can change in one part, in one side of the world, and the other side of the world. So yeah, and other strategy that I always use is showing them, well, not only Mr. Bean videos, but also more videos about culture. I really love one that I love to show them. This is a YouTube channel that it is called Amigos Ingleses. This is perfect to show the differences between a Spanish culture and English culture. And I think they understand with these strategies, they understand English, right? English is not only grammar. English is to use that grammar describing culture. And that's the perfect link that you can make or that you can use to show students that English is not a hard language, that it is an amazing language with an amazing culture, right? American culture or British culture. So those are more the strategies, sorry, that I use in classes, and students really like them because they are not usual, like a normal class, English class. No, that's the idea is just to show the students that English is nice, because many students are like, I don't like English, but have you seen the English culture? Have you described this painting? Have you watched Mr. Bean? How you can see there different than here. Also with the Simpsons family, I really like to show videos from them because they have a American culture. They are very, very American, so students can understand the background of the language with this strategy, cultural strategies.
Okay, I think that you are a very good English teacher because nowadays we can find a lot of teenagers that say I hate English because at the schools generally teach English with a book,
Mhm.
and the book generally has a lot of people smiling and humor.
Yeah.
Only grammar, like you were saying. I think that it is very important to work with new strategies, taking into account
Mhm.
all the global changes. Every day, the world changes.
Mhm.
So I think that is very nice to meet English teachers that like to to teach not only the grammar and the vocabulary, the rules. I think that it is very important, and not only to teach English for adults or for teenagers. I think that we can start teaching English in an amazing way for children too. And it is
Mhm.
better because children have uh, an amazing brain. So thank you so much, Angelica, for
Okay.
these answers. I hope you and your family are okay in
Thank you.
this difficult time for all the world. Thank you so much,
Mhm.
and have a
My
nice day.
My pleasure, Carolina. Thank you very much for those amazing questions too. Thank you very much for saying that I'm a good teacher. You are a good teacher too. So thank you very much for this. Those questions let me think a lot about the importance of a culture and language. Of course, when you are teaching, you forget the what are you doing, what you are doing in that time. I mean, you can use cultural things, but you don't notice. You can notice that you are using cultural things, but they are very important in a learning strategy. And thank you so very much for this interview. I hope your family is doing very well too in this quarantine, in this situation, in this hard situation. And see you the next time.
Thank you, Angelica, and see you later.
See you later.